afford it. I am paying for Obama's train wreck ever since the bill was passed. Surely there must be a way to defund or repeal the bill. Please help. I would note for the senator from Illinois, these pleas for help are coming from all across the country. I'm happy to yield for a question without yielding.
I think your answer to Judy is you need a better job. After working a lifetime, 62 years, hard work, the best that she can do. She's never had health insurance, and I think your answer was, Judy, get a better job. So let me ask you another question. When I voted for Obamacare, health care reform, one of the things that motivated me was the fact that health insurance companies would no longer be able to discriminate against Americans with pre-existing conditions. I've had a situation in my family of a child who had a serious physical problem, who could not have qualified but for group health insurance that was available to me as a member of Congress. If I had gone on the open market to buy a policy, I'm not sure I could have bought one for my family to cover my child. So when you say you want to abolish Obamacare, do you want to abolish that part of Obamacare which says you cannot discriminate against people for pre-existing conditions when it comes to health insurance if those people are victims of asthma, diabetes, cancer treatment, mental illness? Do you want to abolish Obamacare and that protection?
I thank the senator from Illinois for that question, and let me answer it in two different ways. Let me talk generally about what the senator talked about his health insurance and my health insurance as a member of the Senate, and then let me talk about pre-existing conditions separately. The first point I will make is that the senator from Illinois is passionate and has been quite eloquent describing what he perceives to be the benefits from Obamacare. And yet I think it speaks volumes that the senator from Illinois and I and every other member of Congress has been exempted by President Obama from the plain text of the statute. The statute provided, and it was inserted quite deliberately, that if we're going to impose rules on the American people, we should be subject to the same rules. We should be put in the exchanges like millions of other Americans. You just talked about the wonderful exchange. The text of Obamacare provides that you and I should be in those exchanges. And it also provides that, just like the other people in the exchange, that our employers can't subsidize it once we get in that exchange. Now, once it passed into law, the Democratic caucus met with President Obama. I obviously was not in that meeting, but I read the public reports of what occurred there. I read the press accounts, and the press accounts all indicated that the majority leader, the Democratic members of the Senate, asked President Obama, please get us out from under this. We don't want to be in the exchanges. Now, I see my friend from Illinois is shaking his head. Look, I was not in the room. You can read the press reports all say that was what occurred. But regardless, that's what happened. So that message was heard by the President because shortly thereafter the administration issued a ruling that exempted members of Congress and exempted our staff. And so I'm curious if the senator from Illinois is such a fan of the exchanges, is such a fan of the health care that has been provided to Judy. Would the senator from Illinois then support Senator Vitter's amendment to provide that every member of Congress, every one of our staffs, every political appointee in the Obama administration, and frankly, I'd like to see every federal employee all put under the exchanges so that if we're going to make the rules for the American people, that we be subject to those same rules, those same plans, so that when we go on television and say the exchanges are really, really good, we're not talking about something someone else is experiencing. We're talking about our own health care.
Without jeopardizing his control of the floor, I would like to respond and ask a question.
I'm happy to yield for a question without yielding the floor.
And the point I'd like to make is the senator is just plain wrong. What he's just stated is just plain wrong. Here is the state of the situation. The health insurance that you enjoy, and the senator from Alabama, and I enjoy, as well as the senator from Virginia, is the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program. It covers 8 million federal employees and their families, including members of Congress and our staff. For the premiums that we pay for the health insurance we choose, the federal government, as our employer, pays 72% of the premiums. This is not an unusual situation. 150 million Americans, half our population, have exactly the same arrangement. Employer-sponsored, employer contributions to the health care of their employees. What the President did was to say, number one, you, Senator Cruz, myself, and others will now have to buy our health insurance through the insurance exchanges that we created in Obamacare. And with it, we will get the employer contribution as we do now, as you enjoy now personally, and I enjoy, for that purchase of health insurance. My wife and I will be choosing a policy from the health insurance marketplace in the state of Illinois. We will have 8 different insurance companies and 165 choices, and that's our insurance. What you quarrel with is an employer's contribution to health insurance. And if that is now your position, the position of Senator Vitter and the Republican Party, that it is a federal subsidy that should be stopped, you are affecting the health insurance not just to members of Congress and their staff, but 150 million Americans. You better think twice about this. If you want to stop employer contribution to health insurance, that is the headline for tomorrow morning. I do not support that. My question is, do you?
I thank the senator from Illinois for his certainly genuine political advice and counsel. And I would note that the experience Democratic senators found of, under Obamacare, suddenly facing the prospect of losing their health insurance, of being forced into the exchanges, health insurance that had been employer-provided, being forced into the exchanges with no employer subsidy. It is a disconcerting experience. It is an experience nobody likes. It is an experience that's lousy. There's a reason why Democratic senators were so upset. There's a reason why congressional staff were so upset. What my friend from Illinois is not focusing on is right now there are Americans all over this country who are experiencing that exact same sentiment because of Obamacare. You know, just a few weeks ago, UPS sent a letter to some 15,000 employees saying we are dropping spousal health insurance because of Obamacare. Now, that's 15,000 UPS employees who had insurance for their husbands and wives, and suddenly those husbands and wives are left without health insurance and being told, go on an exchange with no employer subsidy. Now, Senator Durbin just made a passionate case why that's a terrible thing to tell people. I agree. Listen, my preferred outcome is not to subject members of Congress, congressional staff, political appointees of the administration and federal employees to the exchanges and Obamacare. My preference is to subject nobody to that. But the reason why Senator Grassley inserted that amendment is because we've got a problem of a ruling class in Washington in both parties. This is a bipartisan affliction that believes that the rules that govern Americans, working Americans, don't govern us. And so if we're going to set up a system, if Obamacare is going to force Americans all over this country to lose their employer-provided health insurance, to be forced onto the exchange with no subsidies, then the men and women who serve in this body should feel that pain exactly the same. So when we go on television and say, this is great, we should know of which we speak because we got skin in the game and we're not being treated better. And I think under no circumstance should Congress, members of Congress, be treated better than hardworking Americans. And that's what President Obama did, and he did so by all reports at the request of Democratic senators in this body.
Senator yield for one last question. I know the senator from Alabama.
Senator yield for a question.
I'd like to ask one last question, and then you can have exchange with the senator from Alabama.
Well, Senator yield.
I'm going to yield to the senator from Alabama for a question. I'm happy to return to the senator from Illinois if he would like to remain, but I want to be fair because the senator from Alabama has been waiting for some time. So I'm happy to yield for a question without yielding the floor.
Well, I thank the senator. And an econometric firm and others have studied what's likely to happen in our economy. And as I understand it, they predict far more people will be dumped from the coverage into the exchanges than they have today. So people that are under health care coverage today, they are being matched, paid for there by their employer. The employer discovers that it'd be less expensive to quit providing health care coverage, let those individuals go into the exchange, and they may or may not provide any subsidy to them. So I do think the extent to which we as senators go into the exchange and we are guaranteed the full subsidy we've been getting is different than is going to happen to millions of Americans. I guess the senator maybe has heard that argument and how it's possible that if businesses decide to drop health care, individuals can then be forced to go into the exchange without any subsidy at all. I'd ask Senator Cruz if he understands that that's possibly what could happen to large numbers of Americans.
I think the senator from Alabama is exactly right. We're seeing Americans all over this country hurt from Obamacare. And I want to suggest, Mr. President, that the problem we're debating today, it's bigger than the continuing resolution. It's bigger than Obamacare. It's bigger even than the federal budget. The problem is the men and women of D.C. are not listening. They aren't listening to the millions of Americans who are asking for more accountability, more responsibility, and more truth from their elected officials. And it's time to make D.C. listen. I would observe that during the course of this afternoon, the hashtag #MakeDCListen has been trending #1 because the American people are frustrated. They're frustrated the Democratic senators are not listening to them. They're frustrated that Republican senators are not listening to them. The whole debate we're having right now is not about strategy. It's not about process. It's not about procedures. And it's not about all of the pundits and pollsters and consultants. The problem is D.C. isn't listening. Everyone in America knows that Obamacare is destroying jobs. What the senator from Alabama so eloquently talked about from econometric predictions, you just have to get outside the Beltway to any of the 50 states and actually talk to people that are trying to find jobs. Talk to small business owners that are trying to struggle under the 20,000 pages of regulations. Everyone in America knows Obamacare is destroying jobs, that it's driving up health care costs. Let me encourage right now, everyone in America, President Obama 3.5 years ago promised the average American that by the end of his first term, by the end of last year, the average American family's premiums would drop $2,500. Let me encourage everyone in America whose premiums have dropped $2,500 to go online and tweet, Obamacare cut my premiums. And you know what? I'm willing to venture in every one of these states, if all of the Democratic senators who support Obamacare are willing to say, I will take only the votes of those of you whose premiums have gone down. I can tell you right now on the Republican side, I'll happily take the votes of everybody else. Because I'm going to predict that's not going to be a 50-50 election. It's not even going to be a 60-40 election. Everyone knows this thing isn't working, and Washington is pretending it doesn't know. This process is rigged, and that's why we've got to make D.C. listening. You know, traveling across Texas, just like the senator traveling across Alabama, you hear the stories everywhere you go. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what town you're in. Doesn't matter who you're talking about. You hear the stories. You see people with disabilities saying, please stop Obamacare before I lose my health insurance. You see young people who'd like to be working towards a career saying, please, I'd like a job. You know, I met with a whole bunch of servicemen and women who just come back from Afghanistan at a military base in Texas. And I asked them, as I try to do in any gathering that is a small enough group that you can do this, go around, share an issue weighing on your heart that you pray about, that you're concerned about. I remember one young soldier said, I'm most worried about jobs. When I come out of the military, am I going to have a job? All my buddies, when they come out, they can't find jobs. And everyone nodded and said, that's exactly right. The American people want to stop this madness, and so do I. Here in Washington, we pass million-dollar bills, billion-dollar bills no one's ever read without even voting on them. We call it unanimous consent. And it's only unanimous because we don't let the American people know. You know, it'd be very interesting to bring 100 of our constituents in on any unanimous consent bill that's spending $1 billion here, $1 billion there. See what our constituents think about that. The system is designed deliberately to hide what we're doing. In this debate right now, there are many members of this body that are happy that the debate is covered with obscurity over procedure, obscurity over a motion for cloture, on a motion to proceed, on a thingamawag. Nobody knows what that is. And you know what? That benefits members of this body because it lets all 100 go back to their citizens and say, hey, what were you for? Yeah, I was for that. Because I was for the motion to whatchamacallit. And no one understands what that is. You know, one of the things we see our leaders demand approval for bills before they're amended. So we're being asked this Friday or Saturday to vote to shut off debate on this bill before we know what the bill will be. We don't know what amendments Harry Reid's going to file, but we're asked to cut off debate nonetheless. It's like former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said, pass it to find out what's in it. You wonder why the American people are disgusted with what happens in Washington. That's business as usual in this town. Listen, the way this is planning to unfold is very simple. Majority Leader Reid has said if he succeeds in cloture, if he succeeds in shutting off debate on Friday or Saturday, that he's going to introduce one amendment, and by all appearances only one amendment, to fund Obamacare in its entirety. And that will be subject to a straight 51-vote threshold. Now, there are a couple of dynamics going on. Number one, Republicans are actively debating among ourselves. Should Republicans vote with Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats to allow Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats to fund Obamacare with a straight 51-vote partisan majority? Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't find that a difficult question. I think that should unify all 46 Republicans that no, we should not enable Obamacare to be funded, and that a vote for cloture on Friday or Saturday is a vote to fund Obamacare. They are one and the same. They are identical. If you vote to give that power to Harry Reid to fund Obamacare, then you are responsible for it being funded, and for, by the way, it being funded in the same broken process where there are no amendments, there is no opportunity to change it, there is no opportunity to offer anything. You don't have an opportunity to offer an amendment. I don't have an opportunity to offer an amendment. Instead, it is brute political force. But I'll tell you an upside. An upside, frankly, from some members of the Republican caucus. If debate is cut off, they can tell their constituents, I voted for the House bill. It's not true, but they can tell them that. But even better, a 51-vote threshold. Here's the dirty little secret that people don't want to admit. There are more than a few Republicans on this side that affirmatively want a 51-vote threshold on funding Obamacare. Why? Because they want two outcomes. Number one, if we have a 51-vote threshold on funding Obamacare, I promise you all 46 Republicans will vote against it. Be a straight party line vote, which means every Republican can go back to their district and say, Mr. and Mrs. America, when I had the opportunity to vote against Obamacare, I did it. I did what you want. And the rest of it's kind of hidden in the procedural mumbo-jumbo. But the beautiful outcome, and the reason why some Republicans want a 51-vote threshold, is if it's 51 votes, we will lose. As the President is well aware, there are more than 51 Democrats in this body. It will be a partisan, party-line Democrat vote, exactly how Obamacare got passed into law. And I'm going to suggest that Republicans going along and saying we want a symbolic vote is not listening to the people. Look, the dysfunction's on both sides. The Democratic members of this chamber, I understand. Look, Obamacare is a Democratic law signed by a Democratic president, passed into law with only Democratic votes. It is hard, if you are a member of a political party, to admit, gosh, this thing that we put a lot of political capital in, it ain't working. That's a risky thing for anyone to say. Now, I will encourage, my hope is by the end of this process, we will see some Democrats, some Senate Democrats, listen to their voters and recognize, say, listen, I thought this thing would work. I hoped it would work, but it hasn't. It's what the unions have said. The labor unions that publicly, vocally supported Obamacare, and many of them were active proponents of getting it passed, they've looked at it and said, you know what, we thought it would work, it hasn't. There's no shame in admitting that you tried something and it didn't work. I very much hope over the course of this debate we will see some Democratic senators doing so. Now, I would note that the fact that Senate Democrats are not participating, are not here, makes it less likely. But on the Republican side, the game is the same. You know, Washington, D.C. is a strange place in many, many regards. One of which is symbolic votes are treated as tremendously important. You know, I remember, I'm told of a conversation that Senator Lee had with a member of the House when early on the House had not yet voted to defund Obamacare, but there was discussion about casting a symbolic vote to do so. And the American people were quite unhappy with that and expressed that view. And both Senator Lee and I expressed that view that we shouldn't be engaging in procedural games. We should actually be defunding Obamacare. And one particular House member, who will remain unnamed, called Senator Lee and made a comment that I thought was particularly revealing. He said, "You guys should be grateful. We gave you your vote." And I remember thinking, what a curious turn of phrase. Grateful. What an odd Washington view of things. Why should we feel gratitude for getting a vote that is 100% destined to lose because it's offered in such a way that Harry Reid on a party line vote can fund Obamacare, and yet we can all have a symbolic vote? And the reason, frankly, Mr. President, is this is a town that for a long time neither side has listened to the people. This is a town that for a long time there are elected politicians that want symbolic votes. Let me be very clear. I don't want any symbolic votes on anything. I think every one of us, our constituents, should know what we believe. And whether we get a vote on it or not to demonstrate it shouldn't matter, because if we're standing and fighting, if we're walking the walk, our beliefs should be self-evident. D.C. responds, the D.C. establishment responds. Anyone that tries to tell the truth, look, I promise you, my observations right now that there are some Republicans that would like a symbolic vote and then would like to lose so that they don't have any risk of it actually being defunded, I promise you those comments are not getting me invited to any cocktail parties in Washington anytime soon. And that's perfectly fine. I don't particularly enjoy cocktail parties anyway. You know what, though? This town needs a lot more truth-telling. It's absolutely true. Everyone here knows it, but you're not supposed to say it out loud. There's a custom where we kind of wink at each other and say, listen, you're telling your constituents one thing, I'm telling my constituents one thing, and let's not bother to give them the opportunity to know the truth. If we got 100 of your constituents or mine, if we got 100 citizens from any of the 50 states and we put them in this room instead of 100 senators, I promise you, number one, our constituents, not a one of them would care about a symbolic vote. If you got 100 people, they'd be like, why do you want a symbolic vote? What's the point of that? It's only politicians who make their living staying in office that want symbolic votes, because symbolic votes are useful for getting reelected. They don't actually change the country. They don't make people's lives better. But they do help politicians who want to get reelected and want to run a campaign ad saying, here's what I voted to do. If you got 100 citizens from the Commonwealth of Virginia, the great state of Texas, the great state of Alabama, what they would say on Obamacare is, we got to fix this. We got to get people back to work. We got to deal with all the young people that are stuck in dead-end jobs because they can't get a job coming out of school. We got to deal with all the people, all the single moms working in diners who are finding themselves working 29 hours a week because of Obamacare. We got to deal with all of the people who are struggling because their health insurance premiums are skyrocketing under Obamacare. We got to deal with all of the people who are losing their health insurance under Obamacare. That is why I'm speaking out today. It's why so many others have come here speaking out, because we've got to make D.C. listen. That's what this fight is about, is make D.C. listen to the American people. And I very much hope that the debate over the course of this week has a real effect, changing the culture. That's why this body has held 10, 12, 14% approval ratings. You know, Mr. President, I remember a few months ago when all of us were in the old Senate chamber. All 100 senators. It was a bipartisan meeting. It was actually a very interesting, productive conversation. And I remember a number of senators commenting about the low approval ratings that Congress has held in and saying something to the effect that it's because we're not more efficient, we don't pass more laws. And I got to say, I think that gets it exactly backwards. I have never once found any constituent in the state of Texas, and I suspect there are not many in your state or my state or anyone else's state, who says the problem is you guys aren't passing enough laws. That's not what I hear from the people. Now, it's what you hear from politicians in Washington who'd like to pass as many laws as possible so they can go take credit for them, but it's not what you hear from the people. The people at home say, you guys have done enough damage already. I'll tell you why I think we're held in such low esteem. It's because we don't listen to the American people. Every poll that has been done for years of the American people, whether any state, your state, my state, any state, even bright blue states, Democratic states, you ask the American people, what's your top priority? Jobs and the economy is the overwhelming answer. That's true if you ask Republicans. Even if you ask just Democrats in just bright blue states, jobs and the economy is still their top priority. Or independents or libertarians, anyone you ask. And yet you and I have both served, Mr. President, in this body 9 months. I would note in the 9 months we've been here, the United States Senate has spent virtually zero time even talking about jobs and the economy. Not on the agenda. We don't talk about it. We spent 6 weeks talking about guns, talking about taking away people's Second Amendment rights, and no time talking about fundamental tax reform, fundamental regulatory reform. Today, talking about defunding Obamacare, the biggest job killer in the country. You want to get jobs in the economy going? There is nothing we could do that is more important than defunding Obamacare. And what's the case? There are right now 3 members of the United States Senate on the floor of the Senate and 2 members of the United States House. If you ask the American people how many senators should be here in the debate over defunding Obamacare, the biggest job killer in this country, because the American people's top priority is jobs and the economy, the American people would say all 100 senators. What possibly do you have that's more important to do? Now, I suspect some of our colleagues are at a fundraising dinner. Some of our colleagues are at home with their families. You want to know why Congress is held in such low esteem? It's not that we don't pass enough laws. It's that the priorities of the men and women in this body are not the priorities of the men and women of America. We're not listening to America. So the most important objective, what I hope will come of this week, more important than the continuing resolution, than the budget, more important than Obamacare, is that we make some real progress to changing the culture of this place so that both Democrats and Republicans start listening to the people. That's the way our democratic republic is supposed to work. And that right now, unfortunately, is not how it's working right now.
Yield for a question.
I'm happy to yield for a question without yielding the floor.
The Senator made an important point about too often what goes on around here is that we act to obscure the reality of what's happening. I think that's important. I'd like to ask you about it. You asked Senator Durbin, I didn't see exactly how he answered. I think you asked him whether or not he believed in a single payer. I don't think he answered. We know for a fact, though, that Senator Reid in August said, when squarely asked, do you believe in a single payer, he said, yes, yes, absolutely, yes. close quotes. So what we've learned since then is that others are making the same statement. This spring, Senator Sanders from Vermont, an honest and able senator, said in the Budget Committee, this bill is not going to work. Really, in my view, it's not going to work. It needs to be a single payer. Now, Senator Sanders is one of our more liberal members, and I think at one point identified himself as a socialist. But he's an honest, able advocate, and he said the truth. This bill, as written, won't work. It has to be a single payer. Just this afternoon in the Budget Committee, one of our esteemed members of the Democratic Party, when I made comment about Senator Reid, the majority leader of the United States Senate, saying he wanted a single payer, he said, well, I want this ought to be a single pay system. So I don't know how many others have. The President said it in 2003 when he was running. He flat out said he wanted to have a single payer. Then he backed off, began to obscure that position, it seems to me. It seems to me that they realized that American people were nowhere ready to have the government take over health care. So what did they do? It seems to me they obscured what the reality of this legislation was. They began to move away from it, and they began to say it was something that it wasn't. But now in the last few days, it's almost like they've come out here and openly beginning to say that's what should happen. I understand the Democratic leader in the House, Nancy Pelosi, has said that she favors a single-payer system. So, Senator Cruz, I think I want to say to you that I feel like you're doing important work because the American people may not yet fully know how huge an issue it is before this Congress. This is huge. Let me ask you again here. When we say there's a single payer, hair begins to stand up on my neck. I think I know who the payer is. Who would be the single payer for all health care in America if that kind of agenda took place?
Well, thank you, Senator Sessions, for that very important question. And the payer would be the United States government, which means the payer would be the U.S. taxpayer, which means the payer would be hardworking Americans. And once the federal government starts paying for all health care in America, which has been the stated position of the far left for a long, long time, and the senator from Alabama made reference to Senator Bernie Sanders, and I agree with you. I respect Senator Sanders' commitment to his principles. Commitment, as you note, he previously ran as a socialist, as he described it. I respect that degree of candor, and frankly, I would be very happy if this body had 10 more Bernie Sanders and 10 more Mike Lees, because I think that would be far more truth in advertising, and then we could have real debates about what should the role of government be in our lives. Should we have socialized medicine? That's a very good debate to have, especially because, and I know the senator from Alabama agrees with me on this, I think the facts are on our side. Every country on earth that's implemented socialized medicine, it hadn't worked. And we know what the results are. You implement socialized medicine, you inevitably see poor quality. You see rationing, you see scarcity, and you see the government getting between you and your doctor, the government deciding you want a health treatment, your mother wants a health treatment, your child needs a health treatment. You have a government bureaucrat deciding whether you get one. Now, maybe the bureaucrat tells you, well, you can get that hip replacement you want in 6 months, in a year. But they may turn to Senator Lee and say, you know what, no, your mom can't get that treatment. We've determined on our tables it doesn't make sense to give her that treatment. I guess she's at the end of her rope. That's what happens. It's the government that decides who gets health care and who doesn't. And you know what? Americans overwhelmingly don't want that. I think there's another point that's critical. It's not just that Majority Leader Reid said that he likes single-payer socialized health care. that he said, as a number of others have, that Obamacare is designed to lead to that. And I think it's very important to ask the question, why? How does it lead to that? Because it goes to both sides of this aisle. There are many Republicans who have said, we shouldn't fight this fight. It's risky. We get political blame. All of the D.C. pundits say we shouldn't do this. Let's just sit quiet and let Obamacare collapse. It's collapsing of its own weight. It's not working. If we sit quiet, it'll collapse, and the Democrats will take the blame. And Mr. President, I'm going to suggest there's far too much worry about blame and credit. Who cares? I don't care if Democrats take the blame. I'd prefer to avoid the collapse and spare the Democrats the blame. Who cares? But if it collapses, why is it that Majority Leader Reid says Obamacare will lead to single payer? Because in the process of collapsing, it'll take our private health insurance system with it. Yeah, it'll collapse, but it'll leave a wreckage. It'll leave millions of people losing their health insurance, being pushed more and more on the exchanges as one insurer after the other is pushed out of the market. And then when it collapses, there's no private health insurance market to go back to. That's why Majority Leader Reid can tell the American people, hey, I want single-payer socialized medicine, and just relax, Obamacare will take us to that. But that's also a real message to all the Republicans who right now have not yet announced that they are going to oppose cloture on this bill, because if we wait for Obamacare to collapse, yes, it will collapse. But with it will go the private health insurance system, and we may well find ourselves in single payer. And I got to say, instead of worrying about blame, instead of trying to play the politics and think through it, listen, I'm not nearly smart enough to play through all the political angles of everything else. I think it's a lot simpler just to stand up and try to do the right thing, and one of the easiest ways to do the right thing is listen to the American people. You want to know what their concerns are? Go home and listen to your constituents. Their concerns are, I'm trying to get a job, I can't get a job. I'm trying to grow my small business, and Obamacare is driving us out of business. I'm afraid of losing my health insurance, and Obamacare is taking away health insurance. Look, we've read, and I've got stack after stack that I'm going to keep reading, of individual constituents in Texas, in Virginia, in Utah, in Alabama, all over the country, who are losing their health insurance because of Obamacare, who are losing their jobs, who are being forced into part-time work. We need to listen to the people. Now, Mr. President, I want to share, I told the men and women who are watching this that if they were to tweet the hashtag #MakeDCListen, which has been, over the course of this, trending, #1, that I would share some of the tweets they sent. And so, with your indulgence, I would like to do so to help give them a voice. Many of them, right now, presumably none of them can walk onto the Senate floor and give a speech. Now, maybe in a few years, some of them might. And maybe in a few years, if enough politicians in this body don't listen to the American people, we may get quite a few of these tweeters who show up as new senators committed to listening to the American people. But in the meantime,
one question.
I'm happy to yield for a question without yielding the floor.
Senator Cruz, as you think about those people that tweeted and emailed and called and written, most of know something about the American system. You know, if you were in Illinois or Alabama or Texas or Utah and you talked about this and said this law has got real problems and it can't work the way it is, wouldn't you think that they would think that the United States Senate would be able to take up this legislation and actually discuss it in a grown-up way, and amendments could be offered that could fix it and be voted on up or down? And don't you think the fact that we're in this situation, as you indicated, a steamroller, where the majority leader is blocking all amendments, all ability to really attempt to fix this legislation, and make something that would actually work is being blocked totally, even though the House has passed repeatedly changing this law and ending this law. Don't you think that the average American would be shocked to think that we're incapable in this Senate to bring up a legislation and have it voted on to fix this bill?
I think Senator Sessions is absolutely right. The Senate isn't trying to fix this bill. The Senate isn't trying to respond to the needs of the American people. It isn't trying to respond to the jobs that have been lost, to the people that have been forced into part-time work, to the people that have lost their health insurance. Instead, it's responding to political power. And I will note that any Republican that on Friday or Saturday, when we have the cloture vote, votes to cut off debate, is voting to give Majority Leader Harry Reid the ability to force funding for Obamacare with no changes, no amendments, shutting off amendments. You can't offer amendments, I can't offer amendments, we can't do anything. It's a pure exercise of political power on a straight party line vote. That will make many Republicans happy because they will get to symbolically vote against it, and then we will be certain to lose if it's a 51 vote threshold. Now, part of the reason I would suggest, you can understand why the Majority Leader wants to do that. Listen, if you're defending a law like Obamacare, that is a train wreck, in the words of the Democrat who wrote the bill, you don't want to debate the substance of it. I would note when the esteemed senator from Illinois was down on the floor, and I appreciate his coming, he sure didn't want to debate why there's a congressional exemption, why members of Congress are treated better than average Americans, why President Obama has said members of Congress are going to be exempted from Obamacare, but hardworking American families are not. Look, I understand. If I were the Democratic Majority Leader and I were defending that position, I wouldn't want to defend it either. Because I got to tell you, there's not a state in the Union where our constituents wouldn't just about tar and feather us if we stood in front of them and defended. There should be a special exemption for members of Congress, but not for you. And for big business. President Obama granted an exemption for big business, but not for you, not for hardworking Americans. Look, what a perfect example of the broken system, of the disconnect between D.C. and Washington, D.C. and the American people. And so it is indefensible on the merits, and so this whole process is designed not to debate it on the merits. It's designed never to have that debate because, as I observed earlier, the old adage, and my friend Senator Lee will recognize this from his days as a litigator, as will the chair, the old adage in the courtroom, if you have the facts, pound the facts. If you have the law, pound the law, and if you don't have either, pound the table. So, if you're defending Obamacare, if you're defending exemptions for giant corporations and members of Congress that don't go to the average American families, you don't want to talk about the facts and you don't want to talk about the law. So you want to pound the table. You want to talk about shutting down government. You want to scare people. You want to threaten to cut off the funding of the men and women in the military, which is grossly irresponsible. I think Congress should never, ever, ever imperil the salaries of the men and women who risk their lives to protect us. And this body should immediately take up the defense authorization bill that the House passed so that we can make sure the men and women of the military are always paid. And by the way, even without that, if there were a partial shutdown, the President has all the authority he needs in existing law to pay the men and women of the military. But listen, if you don't want to debate the merits, you've got to distract people. And so it's a game, you know, a professional magician, if you talk to a professional magician, magicians are good at banter, and they're good at smoke and mirrors and distraction. And sometimes when they raise their hand and they have a shiny object over here, they want everyone to look over here. It's because they're pulling the card out of the deck with this hand. There are a lot of professional magicians in this United States Senate. All of the discussion about shutdown, and for that matter, all of the personal politics, all of the attacks, more than a few of which have occurred within the Republican conference, more than a few of which have been directed at Senator Lee, more than a few of which have been directed at myself, more than a few of which have been directed at the courageous House conservatives who led the fight in the House to get the House of Representatives to do the right thing and defund Obamacare. There's a purpose to them, and it's not even the purpose that appears on the face of it. You would think the purpose that appears on the face of it is if you're leaking nasty quotes, trying to beat up people, if you're sending congressional staffers to give anonymous quotes with a little bit of profanity, a little bit of sort of mean, wicked sense of humor, you'd think you're doing it because you're trying to pound somebody. It's not even that. I mean, that's an added side benefit. But it's all about distraction. Make it about the personalities. Make it about the people. Make it about anything other than Obamacare. Because if we were actually talking about Obamacare, if we were listening to the people, listen, if we were listening to the people don't give a flip about any of the 100 of us. They just don't care about politicians, and for good reason. There are very few people in America who say, you know, what do you want to do on the 4th of July? Pal around with a bunch of elected politicians. Most people want to be in their backyard grilling burgers with their kids. God bless them for it. That's why America is the greatest country on earth, because we have families, and it's not about government. You know, in a totalitarian regime, everyone thinks about government almost all the time, because when you got a jackboot on the back of your neck, it's hard to think about anything else. The game in Washington is smoke and mirrors. The game in Washington is distract from anything except the thing the American people care about, which is fixing the problems, addressing jobs and the economy. That's what's not happening. All right, so let me read some tweets.
One more time.
Will the senator yield?
I'm happy to yield for a question. I would note my friend from Alabama seems bound and determined to stop the tweets. God bless.
I'm interested in those tweets. I just want to say thank you for what you've done, because I think you are alerting all of us to the critical importance of the health care issue. This is a plan, it seems to me, and you've expressed it, I believe, to take over health care by the United States government. We can all disagree, and I was here when everybody on the Republican side fought this legislation until Christmas Eve, when it was finally rammed through shortly before Scott Brown from Massachusetts could take office and kill it. That's how close it was. And I know people disagree about how to deal with it, and I understand and respect people with different agreements, different visions, but I just wanted to say your leadership is, I think, served a valuable purpose tonight, and I am and I wish you every success in those efforts, and I hope that as you continue tonight that you will drive home the critical importance of this issue as we go forward. It's a matter that this entire nation cannot look away from. It's a matter we'll need to consider fixing, because the legislation as presently written will not work. And we've got two choices, it seems to me. Will we move forward to a single payer, as Senator Sanders says we must do, because it won't work as written, or we will move back to the classical American view of insurance and private health care in your own personal physician. So I thank the senator from Texas, and would be pleased to hear some of those great tweets I know you've gotten.
Well, I thank the senator from Alabama. I thank him for his perseverance, his leadership, and his courage. I will say there have been more than a few legislative fights, and even the few months I've served in this body, in which Jeff Sessions and I have been fighting side by side, and I appreciate his friendship and wisdom, and it matters in this body. So let's hear from the American people some of the tweets that have been sent this afternoon during this discussion. Already got a second job, again, because taxes are squeezing me dry. Make D.C. listen. Congress passes laws that they don't follow, lives large off our money, and has contempt for those they represent. Make D.C. listen. 2,700 pages when it was passed, over 20,000 pages now to implement it. Make D.C. listen. Vote no on cloture. A vote for cloture is a vote to fund Obamacare. Defund Obamacare. Make D.C. listen. We will not go quietly into this disaster called Obamacare. Make it cover everyone or no one. Make D.C. listen. What a great point. If Obamacare is such a terrific thing, as its defenders say, then all of us should be subject to it. Big businesses, members of Congress, our staffs, President Obama, every political appointee in the government, every federal employee. And if that's a burden, and I believe it'd be a huge burden. I would not be eager about that personally, but if that's a burden, then it shouldn't cover anybody. If there's some reason why that would be unacceptable, and I would note, by the way, I actually think of all of those, our friends on the Democratic aisle would probably get the most pushback from having it apply to all federal employees, because federal employees would push back mightily, for good reason. But the right thing to take from that is not, well, all these guys should be exempt. It's why would they push back? If members of Congress and their staff and federal employees and the President and the executive branch employees all found themselves subject to the same exchanges, the same rules that hardworking Americans find themselves subject to, and they would be really, really dismayed, that should motivate every one of us to say, hey, you know, I'm a lot more worried about the single mom working in a diner than I am about the IRS tax agent making $125,000 a year, who's dismayed about being subject to the same rules as that single mom. And if we wouldn't be willing to make it apply to everyone, then it shouldn't apply to anyone. Make D.C. listen. Do the right thing and defund this abomination of an unfair tax. Listen up, America. This is your wake-up call. Make D.C. listen. Defund Obamacare now. We do not need this injurious legislation to be enacted. Make D.C. listen. Stay strong. Vote no on cloture. Obamacare must be stopped. The will of majority of Americans is to defund Obamacare. Make D.C. listen. Sick of our employees deluding themselves into believing they are our bosses. Make D.C. listen. And for those who didn't follow it, we're the employees, the elected representatives who work for the American people, and yet an awful lot of people in this body think we're the bosses. That's exactly backwards. We don't want Obamacare. We never did. Defund it. Make D.C. listen. Just finished college. Can't get a full-time job. Thanks, Obamacare. Make D.C. listen. There should be no law that exempts a few and burdens the citizens. We, the people, do not, knots in all caps, want Obamacare. Make D.C. listen. D.C. elite are out of touch. IRS has no business being involved with health care. Make D.C. listen. Make D.C. listen, because Obamacare and its tax will damage the opportunity of Americans to choose the course of their own lives. My insurance premiums from $450 in 2010 to $880 in 2013 with $1,500 deductible. Make D.C. listen. Obamacare is a job killer, will ruin health care. Look at those numbers again. 2010 was just a few years ago. $450 was that individual's health insurance premium. Now it's $880 in 2013. That's the impact Obamacare is having. Oh, here's a nice one. Thank you for reading tweets so the American people can be heard. Make D.C. listen. You're welcome. It is a privilege to have a chance to, in some small way, help provide a voice for the American people. IRS bureaucrats don't want Obamacare either, but they're happy to force everyone else to conform to it. Make D.C. listen. Obamacare has turned America into a part-time nation. And people are losing their homes. They can't feed their children properly. Make D.C. listen. Mr. President, I want you to think about that last tweet for a second. Obamacare has turned America into a part-time nation, and people are losing their homes. They can't feed their children properly. You know what? If any member of this body was forced to work part-time, was losing his or her home, couldn't feed his or her children properly, it'd be a crisis. You want to talk about getting our attention? It'd be a crisis. If it was a family member, if it was our parents, if it were our kids that were facing that, we'd move heaven and earth to address that. And yet here it's our boss, it's the American people that are experiencing that. And most members of this Senate are doing something else other than being here. I'll note we've got Congressman Louis Gohmert, Congressman Paul Brown, Congressman Richard Hudson was here earlier. But yet where's the Senate? We don't feel the pain of the American people like it's ours, like it's us. It's not surprising because President Obama's exempted Congress from Obamacare, so we're not feeling the pain. That's the problem. Obamacare has turned America into a part-time nation, and people are losing their homes. They can't feed their children properly. Make D.C. listen. 3 years and they still can't get it going. Make D.C. listen. Make D.C. listen because D.C. is not listening to the American people. Help us. Help us is all caps. Defund ACA. It is job-killing and not affordable, and we won't get care, and our politicians act like it's good for us. Well, that's true. A lot of politicians do act like, hey, this is really good for you. Mind you, we don't want to be subject to it, but trust us, it's good for you, because different rules apply to the Washington, D.C. ruling class than apply to the American people. That's the problem. Help revive the economy, make D.C. listen, and defund Obamacare. Fight for real reform. Obamacare is a disaster. Make D.C. listen. Letters saying your plan is canceled due to the ACA ruins the like it, keep it narrative. Make D.C. listen. By the way, that's from an individual that is at DemCalAl. Makes me wonder if it's a Democrat in California named Al. I don't know if it is. But it would be interesting if it were. This is what's interesting about this is if you get outside of Washington, not just Republicans who understand Obamacare isn't working. It's Democrats, it's independents, it's libertarians. I feel quite confident, Mr. President, that James Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters, is not a Republican. I really have no doubts on that front. And yet, Mr. Hoffa, in a public letter, has said Obamacare is destroying the 40-hour work week that is the backbone of the American middle class. Those are just the facts. It's what's happening. If we were listening to the American people, every one of us would be here doing everything we could to turn it around now. We wouldn't be happy to wait till the end of the week. We'd say now. Let's stop this job killer. Defund Obamacare because I know what's best for my health care, not some bureaucrat. Make D.C. listen. Defund Obamacare. The majority of America is against this intrusion into our private relationship with our doctor. Make D.C. listen. Make D.C. listen because Obamacare is killing full-time jobs. Make D.C. listen. Defund Obamacare because it takes our freedom away. If you love your country, value freedom and choice, oppose tyranny-style government laws, then make D.C. listen to you. Tired of senators who won't listen. Make D.C. listen. Make D.C. listen. Please stop Obamacare. It's killing this country. We need the government to listen to the people and do what is best for the country. I support defunding Obamacare 100%. Make D.C. listen. Make D.C. listen. We don't want government intrusion into our health care. D.C. isn't listening. Everyone in America understands that Obamacare isn't working. Make D.C. listen. The health care reform that the President sold America isn't the health care reform that America is getting. Make D.C. listen. Obamacare, ain't nobody got time for that. All caps and 3 exclamation marks. Make D.C. listen. Way to go. Make D.C. listen to our voices calling for individual liberty. Make D.C. listen. We don't get an exception, so you shouldn't either. I agree. I think all of us should get an exception. Every American should get an exception. And there's no world in which Congress should be treated better than hardworking American families. I don't want more government. Make D.C. listen. I wish the Senate would listen to us. Please listen to the people. We don't want this bill. We want freedom. Make D.C. listen. Make D.C. listen. Obamacare is turning us into a part-time economy. Government is designed to go by the will of the people, not the other way around. Make D.C. listen. We don't want it, don't need it, and can't afford it. Please tell them to listen to its citizens. Make D.C. listen. Ronald Reagan warned us about government-run health care. Bad, bad, bad. Make D.C. listen. Make D.C. listen. Analysts, experts, and business people agree that the ACA will hurt our economy. Americans are fed up with our elected officials not listening. We, in all caps, don't want Obamacare. Make D.C. listen. Let the free market make health care more affordable by allowing sales across state lines. Make D.C. listen. Let me say, by the way, that is a terrific proposal. Once we defund Obamacare, there's a lot we need to do on health insurance. There's a lot we need to do on health care reform to make it more affordable, to make policies personal and portable so they go with you regardless of what job you're in. And one of the best things we can do is allow interstate competition. Right now it's illegal to purchase health insurance across state lines. Now, why does that matter? Well, the biggest barrier to access for people who don't have health insurance is the cost. And you get government regulators that drive the cost up and up and up because they mandate this bell and this whistle, and you got to cover everything they want. And it's a great thing for politicians because, look, if you mandate every health insurance policy has to cover this procedure, it lets politicians come to the people and say, hey, I'm giving you free what-have-yous. But one of the simplest principles of government is Tannstaffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Every time you mandate that a health insurance plan must include whatever benefit it is that politicians want to give away to the people, it drives the cost up. And every time the cost goes up, there are more and more people that can't afford it. So you can have a lot of politicians giving away free stuff, and when you do that, it will mean there will be a whole bunch of people that will get no coverage at all because they can't afford it. Now, if we would allow purchases across state lines, we'd see a true 50-state national marketplace, true competition. So there'd be real choice. And what that would mean, let's say you're a young, healthy person. By the way, the people who may be the biggest losers of all under Obamacare are young people. It's difficult to design a bill to do more damage to young people. The lost generation is what economists are now dubbing young people, in significant part because of the consequences of Obamacare. If you're a young, healthy person, it may well make sense to purchase catastrophic health insurance. Health insurance, if, God forbid, you get hit by a truck tomorrow, or you get diagnosed with some horrible, life-threatening disease. The odds are relatively small that that's going to happen to any of us, but if it does, it's really, really bad, and boy, that's when we want health insurance. If you could purchase insurance across state lines, there'd be a 50-state market, and you could get low-cost, inexpensive, catastrophic coverage. You know, Mr. President, if you think about health insurance right now, it doesn't really work like insurance, and I want to compare it to an insurance market that works. Most of us are familiar with car insurance. Most of us who have cars have car insurance. You know, with car insurance, if you need to change the oil in your car, you don't call Allstate and say, change the oil in my car. If you get a flat tire, you typically don't call Allstate and say, hey, I've got a flat tire, change the tire in my car. Now, if, God forbid, you get hit by an 18-wheeler, your car gets totaled, then you call your insurance company and said, this catastrophic event happened, that's why I paid for insurance. A lot of people, when it comes to health insurance, though, right now in the system, treat it as just a third-party payer, instead of dealing with catastrophic, unlikely events. So that is a reform that would make a real difference. If you want access to low-cost health insurance, allowing people to purchase across state lines after we defund Obamacare would make a real difference. And if we added to that reforms that expanded health savings accounts so that you could save in a tax-advantaged way to meet routine prevention, maintenance, to take care of the equivalent in the auto context of changing the tire, that would go even further. And if we change the tax laws right now, most people don't know that employer-provided health care is an historical anomaly. It actually arose during World War II and shortly thereafter, when wage and price controls were in effect. And employers had a challenge. They wanted to recruit employees, but they couldn't raise wages. It was against the law. So they began offering health insurance as a way to attract people to say, hey, come work for my company, we'll give you health insurance. And right now, the federal tax laws heavily favor employer health insurance. The problem is, we don't live in 1950s America anymore. We don't live in a world, you know, there was a time when people would go and get a job at a big company and work 30, 40, 50 years, retire, get a gold watch, and that would be it. We don't live in that kind of world anymore. Most people will work for one company and then another company and then another company. It's relatively unlikely that American workers are going to stay with one company their entire life. They're going to switch jobs, and possibly a lot, sometimes voluntarily and sometimes maybe not voluntarily. You know, when you and I were in the private sector, Mr. President, if we lost our jobs, if we got fired, you didn't lose your life insurance. You didn't lose your car insurance. You didn't lose your house insurance. The only insurance you'd lose if you lost your job was your health insurance. Now, Mr. President, that doesn't make any sense. Of all of them, it's the worst one to lose. And, you know, the senator from Illinois asked about pre-existing conditions. If we could change the law so that health insurance plans were personal and portable, just like your car insurance, regardless of where you happen to work, it goes with you, it travels with you. That goes a long, long way to solving the problem of pre-existing conditions. Because where pre-existing conditions have such a big impact is when somebody loses one job and is trying to get coverage of the next job. If you could take your personal portable plan with you, that goes a long, long way to mitigating it. Now, let me point out, all of those reforms have a fundamentally different philosophy than Obamacare. Obamacare has a philosophy: empower government over your health care, over your life, put a government bureaucrat between you and your doctor. The reforms I laid out are all about empowering you, the American people, empowering you, the patient, to make choice, empowering you to make the decisions about your health care with your doctor, with no government bureaucrat anywhere near you. And I'm going to suggest, Mr. President, the difference is those plans come from listening to the people. Obamacare is the opposite of listening to the people.
The gentleman from Texas, yield for